Welcome, Doug. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this interview with us today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We like to begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on, as well as acknowledging our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We also want to take time to acknowledge our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we continue to stand on as we do this work and we build and share together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So again, I want to thank you for being here. Please go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners and let them know about the origins of the work that you're doing in the community now.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. I serve as the executive director for End Homelessness St. John's in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and that's on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and of the Beothuk. And the Beothuk, their culture has been lost forever, and it's something that we reflect on as an organization and as a community as well. So our work, we really serve as a system planning organization. And when I say that, it's sort of helping to facilitate the system of care across multiple community organizations, public systems that serve as entry points and access points for those who are experiencing homelessness and who are at risk and of homelessness, and making sure that they have the right supports at the right time to meet their needs. And that's been sort of our work in front of us the past 4 years, especially through the pandemic, is working really collectively as one system to get better outcomes for people.
That's great. And can you elaborate on the mission and the vision of the organization?
Yeah, so our vision is a place where everyone has a place to call home in St. John's, and we are focused on St. John's. Some of our work spans beyond that, but we're really focusing on St. John's as a community. So our work again is to help really facilitate that system of care, so that when homelessness occurs, it's rare, it's brief, and that it's non-recurring. And so how do we create a system that supports folks through those experiences to minimize the impact and the trauma that's associated with homelessness?
Absolutely. So what inspires you to do this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, many things. I think foundationally, I mean, growing up in Southern Ontario, my family lived in various community and social housing, and seeing my parents struggle with a lot of those things sort of inspired me. And I was really fortunate and privileged that I was able to go to school, and it was only through sports as the mechanism that got me through into university. Once I completed, I just knew I wanted to contribute in some way, shape, or form. And I always kind of knew that my experiences were poverty and is really an income insecurity issue. And how do you solve for those types of issues? I mean, there's all sorts of dimensions, but I really honed in on community economic development, and that really inspired my work early in my career around social enterprise and supporting employment-based social enterprises. And it was conversations with some of the folks that we employed. And when I was in Ottawa, we worked with folks who had mental illness and substance use issues. But it was through conversations with folks to hear about their experiences of homelessness, like active experiences of homelessness, and still coming to work and asking for additional supports just to like maintain their belongings in a safe space in our building. And that kind of opened my eyes to like the periphery of this work is, people are going without, like material deprivation is happening here, and yet folks are still trying their best. And that just opened my eyes to different work and thinking differently about systems and systems change work and what that might mean. So when the opportunity arose to come to St. John's, I jumped at it because it was aligned with my mission, my personal mission and values, and then professionally, just the ability to do something different with a community that's aspiring to make some real change. It was a real opportunity that I wanted to be a part of.
That's great. I'm glad that you were able to follow through on that, and you're doing this remarkable work. It's really necessary. And now I want to just touch on what challenges or barriers that you face in your work and what you and your team are doing to overcome some of those challenges.
Yeah, great question. I mean, through the pandemic, we had transitioned out of the city of St. John's into our own purpose-built nonprofit, as per the community's sort of goals and hopes for what we could do together. So that involves working really closely with community partners and those stakeholders who are serving folks experiencing homelessness. And we wanted to make sure that we could build that trust. Like so much of this work is predicated on trust and being transparent and being accountable. And these are the values that we live and breathe and talk about. We talk about them openly all the time with our team and with our community. So a lot of it was built on trust, and then with that shared goal, with that shared trust and approach, we can then advocate more effectively to governments, right? Because whenever I talk about homelessness, it's never an individual's fault. It's usually the result of systems failures, right? Whether that's colonialism, whether that's gender-based violence, whether that's intergenerational poverty, inadequate resources to health. There's a culmination of factors, and so when we can start talking to the systems that perpetuate this issue as one unified community, that goes so much farther in our efforts, because at the end of the day, all of this is based on political will. The political will to make the investments into people, into housing, into supports, into education. And as a community, we're that opportunity our opportunity is right in front of us. With our premier most very recently calling a task force and committing resources to address some of these issues. So it's a real responsibility and privilege to have that work in front of us. But at the end of the day, working together is the one way that you can really start to see some action.
Absolutely. So do you have a key set of priorities that you're working on right now that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've been focused on, in addition to just like building the system of care and iterating it and refining it, we're also trying to make sure that, those voices for lived experience are integrated into all aspects of our work, and into the advocacy efforts that we're creating with our community. So just making so that continuation of that efforts. And just to make sure that the political will is maintained and sustained in the efforts to end homelessness in our community.
Absolutely. So how do you feel about the future of affordable housing and homelessness in Canada?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'll be honest, I think it's going to be tougher in the short term but I think the more we can double down on working together and trusting each other as community, as folks who have shared goals, and really being clear, the foundation here is to get better outcomes for people. Like that's the goal. And however we have to do that, we all have a role to play in it. But let's be clear about what those roles are and how we want to do it. But let's always trust the foundation of that work is there. And if we can do that, in our community and communities across the country, I feel like we can start to see some real action, and that action generates better outcomes for people. And I think that's what I want to see, and I know that's what our organization is committed to and our community is committed to.
Absolutely. I know you touched on this a little bit, but we like to know what your ultimate goal is. What would the perfect picture of success look like for you and your team? If you could share that sort of vision with
Mm.
us.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, like I'm not in my job in 10 years, right? Like I think, if you build this is my approach to this, but if you build effective systems, there's no single points of failure. And it's not reliant on an individual or a couple of individuals to make things happen. It just works really well because you have evidence, you have data, you have collaboration, you have co-design of what's required, and that happens constantly, and it's iterative, and it's just built into the system. And that's kind of what we're working towards as our community and as our agency. And how we get better outcomes is taking evidence-informed decisions and making evidence-based investments in those. So, practically speaking, I think we're, as a community, probably a couple of years away, but we're really close to being able to use data more predictively, right? So a lot of the work in the housing and homelessness serving sector is really crisis driven. And it's hard to make investments in prevention when the crisis is in front of you. But if you have better data and you can start predicting a little bit more, then how do you drive prevention resources and emergency resources? So if we can use that data to say, if you invest in these initiatives for these individuals and for this demographic or whomever it might be, if we don't do it here, we know that we're going to have to serve them in crisis down the line. And I would rather not I don't want anybody to have to experience homelessness sort of long enough to qualify for services when we know if we don't intervene here, it's not going to work. So I think data collaboration and a lot of like communication and transparency around how we use data and for what purposes can get us there. And if we do that really well, then we can stem the flow of crisis down the line and start seeing more outcomes early in the earlier stages, while still supporting those who haven't had who've had to go through those experiences of homelessness and prolonged experiences.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So do you have any advice for emerging leaders or people who want to sort of have an impact in this same area? What would you share with them, and what calls of action do you have for the general public as well?
I mean, systems change is not fun work. Like, it's really hard. And I say that like having the benefit of being, like a white male, and looking like the people who are in power. And it's really hard and it's really tough. And building those supports around you, knowing that, you might take a step forward and 2 steps back, but keep stepping forward. But building the supports around you with a team, with whether it's family supports or your team, and at work, it's so important to feeling like you can work towards those goals, whatever they might be. But yeah, my advice is always sort of take time and what I do is I just call other folks who are leaders who I really admire and trust and respect, and just talk to them about what I'm feeling and how I'm feeling. And we don't do enough of that, I think, in leadership roles. And it's definitely not a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of how you can find some energy and purpose in the work that you do. So anybody who's emerging, I always just say, reach out to the people you respect. Just ask them to go for coffee or meet and just have a conversation.
Absolutely. It starts there. I think everyone's advice all year has been collaboration, partnership is, where we really thrive. So thank you for touching on that. Thank you for the remarkable work that you do. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. So we're going to just close the way we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on, as well as our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We also want to acknowledge our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we continue to do this work together for our collective liberation. So once again, thank you so much to you, Doug, and thank you to our viewers and listeners.
Thanks.